Okay, so we're going to start a lecture and continue looking at humanism, and this is going to help with your reading and your primary source analysis. Why I'm gone for this week. So we're talking about some of the characteristics of humanism and Italian humanism on Thursday. So one of the more important aspects of that, as we move into modernity and we talk about the modern state and modern culture, is that humanism we're pushing the concept of secularism. It's important for me to reiterate the fact that secularism doesn't necessarily mean that humanists were non-religious. In fact, many of them continue to be very religious. But what secularist is kind of more about is the worldview in which you separate religion from other aspects of human life. So whether it's like today, we oftentimes think of secularism as a separation with government, but it also, for the humanists, was more about intellectual studies. So is it okay to study themes that don't fit with the Roman Catholic Church or are presenting or pushing Christian theology? And the answer for them is yes. So you can see in The Birth of Venus here, we see the rediscovery of the Greco-Roman world, and this is mythology. And mythology in itself is the religion of the pagans, but yet they're finding beauty within that and within their human achievement, which is a big part of the humanist mindset. And so for them, studying things on its own terms and finding that study to be beneficial is an important theme in secularism. And in the end, what it's going to translate to eventually as we move into the 17th century is going to be studying the world in a completely secular manner, i.e. the scientific revolution is going to be part of that. And that aspect of humanism is really important because secularism is going to really be presented in our modern world today as an inheritance of the European Renaissance. And that is that in our everyday lives, we live in a secular society. We still remain, many of us, and many of the people in our society remain religious, but they have that separation of their spheres, that the religious sphere becomes more of a personal, internal, and then they function within a secular society. So it's one of the more important themes that comes out of humanism, and really one of the more important themes that comes out of Europe as a whole. And you saw that in your summer reading. The author pointed out why study Western history is secularism is a key theme here, because after the Italian Renaissance, this is going to be a growing and important theme as we move through the religious conflicts of the religious wars that end in 1648. And after that, they realized that a secular government is the way to go. So we saw that fight in the late Middle Ages in Unum Sanctum, the Great Schism, the conciliar movements that pushed us through that. There was this continuing desire in government to begin secularization, which would be separating the religious authority over the secular authority. The secular authority, i.e. the kings, the nobility, had the right to rule over their territory without interference from the Pope. On the humanist side, it was to study other terms or other concepts and fields of study. Those are going to come together. So today we have secular topics of study. We see it in our humanist education, really, in our public schools. And then we also see it in our government in the United States today as a separation of church and state. So that theme of secularism is incredibly important in modernity. We can't talk about Western modernity without the discussion of secularism. So we look at these secularists, the humanists of the Renaissance. They oftentimes are one and the same. And quite honestly, humanists tended to be secularists. And so that is really kind of a pillar of humanist thought. This is oftentimes linked to the development of the merchant class. As you can see in point number 2, it's wealth and political power. We talked about this merchant class presenting a certain problem in traditional European society because they didn't fit with the feudal model. They're not peasants, they're not serfs, they're not knights, they're not lords, and they're certainly not kings. But after the High Middle Ages and the merchant class starts to grow, and the late Middle Ages become increasingly important and incredibly important in the early and high Renaissance, is where do they fit in this social hierarchy? And many of them felt because they made a lot of money, that influence, many of them are becoming educated, that they should have a say. And for them, part of the key was more of a secular society was more empowering to them. And on a more personal side, for many of these people that are generating this new wealth out of the old order, outside of the old order, is that secularism and humanism, the glorification of human achievement, fit with their idea of gaining wealth in the here and now. on its own terms through trade, and it justified that. So we look at some of the early texts of secularism that start to come out. Inferno in the late Middle Ages, early Renaissance. It deals with religious themes, but it's kind of a secular interpretation of society and criticism of society. Petrarch, the father of humanism, is going to emphasize the study of the secular world. And in all these, we see these great humanists start to present secular themes. And so if you look on the left, next to all the names, we have the formation of secular kind of subjects. Literature, philosophy, history, so on and so forth become the basis of studying human beings on their own term in the secular world without the religious, and that's reflected in humanism. And what's really cool today is when you go from class to class to class through different periods, you're seeing the influence of the Renaissance, humanism and secularism in your education as you're studying these different secular topics, studying the world in the here and now. So one of the sources that you're going to look at in this week while I'm gone is going to be Machiavelli's The Prince. And this is regarded as a great work of humanist secularism because his interpretations have been greatly debated throughout history, but everyone can agree on the fact that he's taking a critique of government and power in his society on its own terms without religion. And when we look at humanist secularism, that is the major theme. Can they look at the human experience at different levels, whether it's government or economics or society or whatever it may be? Can you look at the human experience without religious explanation? And what's really important for modernity with that is going to be when we get into science. Can you look at the natural world without the need for religious interpretation? And absent from Machiavelli's treatise on government is any reference to necessarily religion, which is huge. Because when we looked in the late Middle Ages at the fight between Boniface VIII and Philip of the Fair, that was the central theme. And now as we move into the Renaissance, it's almost as if the writers are agreeing with Marsilius of Padua or with Philip that government really is more about the execution of secular power and not necessarily religious power. So it's a really important document, and you're going to read it. And part of what I'm going to do as you answer the questions is look at what you think his intended message is, because it's been taken two ways. Is he presenting a very harsh reality that princes should follow? That is he completely undemocratic and believes that the ruler should be strong and exercise that power over the people in order to keep peace? Or in a way, is he criticizing by saying these are how rulers rule in my time? Because he gives example after example after example, and backwards is a criticism of the reality of government in his times. So that's going to be part of our debate when we look at it. Some of the historians have kind of debated about Machiavelli for years is tone and intention. And so we're going to have that debate upon my return. And we're also going to discuss how this is a great example of humanist secular peace. We'll move through some of the key themes here. I want to keep this short. Again, we'll reflect on this when I get back. The slides are moving slowly. So the last piece of humanism I want to leave off as you move through your primary source analysis for this week is really kind of the difference between the Northern Renaissance and the Italian Renaissance as far as humanism is concerned. And the Northern Renaissance takes on a very different aspect of humanism. So we talked about the rise of humanism and secularism in the Italian Renaissance. We'll look at how it's slightly different in humanism and Christian humanism in the Northern Renaissance, and we'll look at that in the next recording.